Okay, so all of the biological discoveries are the result of intensive research. For example, how do cells make proteins? Okay, or what are the details of respiration? Or how does the brain actually operate? So all biological knowledge that has been studied and acquired and understood comes from the results of many, many lengthy investigations. And those investigations are conducted in a certain systematic fashion that is a scientific way for conducting experiments. And this method has been developed and it's called the scientific method. And it's a methodology used to approach uncertainties and to eventually arise at a conclusion. So what we want to do then is look at the details of the scientific method, because basically it's the way that research is carried out. It's a logical way to solve problems, and it's a process by which scientists investigate the world. And there are various steps. First, you want to collect any observations about the event that's in question or the phenomenon. Then you want to be able to propose answers. In other words, an educated guess about this event or a hypothesis. The next step is to do experimentation. You design tests, test the hypothesis. Now, hypotheses that will fail, okay, the testing, are going to be incorrect. So you see over here, this is what's happening right here. And as a result, either you have to completely reject the hypothesis and abandon it and start all over again, or maybe you just have to modify the hypothesis. But in any event, this method does not prove things, but as a result of all the experiments, a scientist is able to draw conclusions about the observation. Okay, so you can see here how this works, modify or start all over again. Okay, and it's important to note that a hypothesis can never be proved, only disproved. Okay, and that a hypothesis will lead us to predictions. Now, the results cannot be accepted until the tests can be repeated over and over again. That is the idea of reproducibility. And this is important because it guards against certain factors, which we'll look at in just a moment. Okay, so just to review, the scientific method collects observations about a phenomena, proposes an answer or a hypothesis, does experimentation, tests alternative hypothesis if necessary, and repeats the test over and over again, as I said, to guard against certain factors, mistakes, errors, maybe the sample size of subjects that are used is too small, or even bias, okay? Researchers sometimes are so passionate about the work they do, they would unintentionally look at the data to favor their ideas, not necessarily intentionally, but sometimes that does happen. But if the hypothesis is supported, eventually it will become a theory. And so we want to be able to distinguish the difference between a theory and a law. A theory gives you an explanation of why something occurs, and a law is a relationship that says if this happens, then such and such will follow. If this, then that. Let's look at some more details to explain how a law works. We have Charles's law that if you heat a gas, the volume will increase. I'm not telling you why, I'm just saying that if you heat the gas, as we see in the picture, the size of the balloon gets larger. Or if we decrease the volume of a gas, so look at this picture, if we decrease the volume of a gas, the pressure increases. Okay, in both of these cases, I'm just telling you, if you do such and such, then this will happen. But they don't provide any type of explanation. However, there is something called the theory of, or the kinetic theory of gases, and it does explain the behavior of gases. So what we're talking about here with the gases, these two things, these were laws, but there is an explanation, and it has to do with how the gas molecules collide with one another and the container. It has to do with the effect of heat on the motion of the particle, and it has to do with velocity. So it's the kinetic theory of gases explains why if you decrease the volume of a gas, pressure increases, or in the other example, if you heat a gas, why the volume increases. We can explain these with a theory, but the way I'm giving them to you now, I'm showing them to you as laws to distinguish from a theory, which is an explanation as to why something happens. Just to point out the difference between a dependent and independent variable. A dependent variable is what is measured in the experiment, okay? Whereas the independent variable is which is being manipulated or measured, okay? So, for example, we would, the dependent variable could be the growth of a stem, what's measured. The independent variable would be what we're manipulating, which would be the amount maybe of fertilizer, okay? So that which is being manipulated is going to be the independent variable, and the dependent variable is what is actually measured in the experiment. But in any event, let's look at a little experiment here, and we can see how we can start out and with the hypothesis, and we can observe over here that many objects fall. So it would not be unusual to then state that or make a hypothesis that all objects fall at different rates. That, in other words, that heavier objects fall faster. That would be a plausible explanation, right? Heavier objects will fall faster. Well, if we do an experiment, okay, where perhaps we are dropping stones maybe all about the same size, okay, in this case, we find that all bodies fall to Earth at the same rate, independent of their weight, okay, because we're not considering a large variation in the size of the stones. But I have to correct my hypothesis because I found different test results. However, if I keep dropping more objects, okay, and compare, for example, a boulder to a feather, okay, well, in that case, okay, obviously the boulder is going to hit the ground a lot faster than the feather. So I haven't really considered something called air resistance, okay? So we have to modify the hypothesis once again, and we can say then that in the absence of air resistance, and that would occur, for example, if we could do the experiment in a vacuum, because air resistance is like friction. It's and a heavier object would overcome this resistance faster than a lighter one. That's why the boulder will fall faster. But in the absence of air resistance, all bodies fall to Earth at the same rate. And this has become a theory, okay? Okay, so we want to look at one more example of a scientific method, which is Menkes disease or kinky hair syndrome. And the symptoms of this are newborns that are very lethargic. Their hair is white. It's very stubby. It breaks off and it stands on end. And Menkes observed that the hair of these babies is like that of a peculiar wool found on sheep. But these sheep were grazing on a soil that lacked any kind of copper, okay? So we're comparing the hair of a baby, okay, to the wool of a sheep, and they're similar, but these sheep are not getting copper from their soil. So we could make a hypothesis that since these hairs do resemble, or the hair of the babies resembles the wool, then these babies also probably have a copper deficiency, okay? So we could probably come up with the conclusion or a hypothesis that Menkes disease is due to a lack of copper. However, in reality, the babies are getting copper in their diet, but there's a problem at the level of the intestinal cells. Okay? The intestinal cells are not letting the copper be absorbed. So it's slightly different because the babies are getting copper in the diet. The sheep weren't getting it at all, but the problem is at the intestinal cells. Okay? And without copper, then the hair is not constructed properly. So kinky hair syndrome is due to a copper deficiency, but not because it's lacking in the diet. It's because of the intestinal cells, okay?